Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural with our legal experts, Edward Pichardo Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. We thank you for tuning in, for sharing this out with your audience, for letting us know that the information that you're receiving is beneficial to your own knowledge and that you have the resources to contact these two attorneys with the cases or issues that might happen to you or your family members. So we appreciate you being here and we thank you. As we see Jason. Hey, Jason, thanks for tuning in and being a part of today's show. We thank you for always adding your voice to our commentary. So there's a lot going on in the news, and we're going to have our co-host greet you. But I do want to say there's an important piece of news. Somebody on the show has a birthday coming up the end of this week. So while we are kicking off the beginning of summer and enjoying the month of June, one of our co-hosts, I'm start singing that electric company. One of these kids are doing their own thing. No, so we're excited that our co-host,
Hey,
Mr.
wait. So that just shows the generational gap, right? You said one of these kids doing their own thing, and I remember the song being one of these kids are not like the other. So I mean, like, yeah, what I mean? They done changed the song, hipped it up a little bit, did the remix on it,
we did a remix. The remix, because
yeah, they
I'm
did a remix
younger.
on it.
Let the record
Yeah,
show.
no. I give you the shout out for being younger. I'm just saying they did the remix.
But happy pre-birthday, Mr. Russell. We're going to give you a round of applause because we will be on celebrating as he kicks off the month of July on the 1st with another Turn Around the Sun. Hey, Captain Brown, thank you for tuning in and being a part of the show. So let's go on with our greetings from our co-host so we can jump into quite a bit for us to dissect and discuss where the legal meets the cultural. So, Señor Pichardo, ¿cómo está? Buenos días. Where we are. Talk to
¿Cómo está, doctora Grant? Hello, good afternoon. Hola, mi gente. Buena tarde. Glad to have you here today. I'm very, very certain that you're going to find the information you receive on this show educational, enlightening, as well as helpful. So stay tuned, folks. You're in for a good one today.
Thank you, Senor. Muchas gracias. Over to you, Mr. Russell.
Well, I want to say thank you, everybody, and thank you for wishing me happy birthday. Salutations, either pre-show, post-show, in the middle of the show, after the show, next week. Keep it going, as the birthday approaches fast and quickly. If it's July, it's my birthday. That's the way they say it, right? So I want to welcome you to the show. Once again, we are going to dispense information like it's 2-cent candy. You know what I mean? Just stick your hand in the jar and take what you need and pull it on out. All right.
Here we go.
We're not even going to inflate it. You know what I mean? Because there was a time it was 1 cent, then it became 5 cents, then it became 10 cents, then it became 25 cents. If you were around long enough, now candy is 50 cents. You know what I mean? So anyway, we got the knowledge and we're ready to impart it on you to empower our people and protect our people. This is where the legal and the cultural meet. So let's have it do its thing.
Absolutely. So first thing in the news, seems like Mr. Kelly has had his day of reckoning and sentencing of 30 years for a scheme to lure children into sex. I know this is going viral with a lot of reactions. This really sparks and triggers a lot for the families of the victims themselves, going and reliving all of this. So what say you on this sentence? Is that in line with what they normally do, or does this look a little different?
Well, it's hard to talk about what they normally do, right? Because sexual predator type of cases are not voluminous in nature in federal court. They happen, they occur. We deal with them as attorneys, but normal. The only gauge I can give to it is that we know, was it Ghislaine Maxwell? I think that's her name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Who is quote unquote, and I'll put air quotes, quote unquote, co-defendant to Eric Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein, who was charged with sex trafficking and charged with with a variety of charges that had to deal with predatory sexual acts. Now, that was tried in the Southern District. R. Kelly, Robert Kelly's case, was tried in the Eastern District. She got sentenced to 20 years. He got sentenced to 30 years. So when I'm looking at culturally, even though the cases are different, but we're still talking predatory acts against and among against minors and sexual acts against minors. One got sentenced to 20, that's being Maxwell. R. Kelly got sentenced to 30. Maxwell was considered, quote unquote, a conspirer, co-defendant, whereas R. Kelly was the number one target. Then it appears to be on par to me. But what I will tell you, and this is the cultural part, that I had this conversation with a client of mine just the other day before the sentence went down, is how life is going to be so different for these two people charged with similar predatory sexual crimes. One is going to go to prison with a lineage of economic wealth, that is Maxwell. And I'm talking old money. I'm talking green money. I'm talking wrinkled money, real wrinkled money, that $1 billion type money, not that fresh Chase money that you like, I mean, that old Crayola crayon type money. You know what I mean? So that person is going to jail. And then you have someone like R. Kelly, who, for the most part, is considered wealthy. But when you look at fighting cases in New York, in the federal court, and fighting cases in federal court in Chicago, that record money, producing money can go away quite quickly. Now, I bring this up because here's the cultural part. There is difference between gender, which has its place, but one is going to jail, and after that 20 years, they come out, they're still going to be economically well off. Their foundation is not going to be shaken economically. The other one who goes to jail, when they come out, they probably will not be economically well off, because we're in the era of cancellation. So he's going to be canceled. We know that's happening. That will happen over time. So he's coming out. And there is a big difference culturally for someone going to jail that knows that they have money and someone going to jail and they don't have any money, right? Because when you're in jail, you're looking at what your future is going to be. You're looking at the fact that you can't get a job. You're looking at the fact that you're a pariah on your society. People that you really are irrelevant. But when you have money, those things go away. You go to jail, you come back out, maybe you gain interest, right? I mean, I smirk and laugh at it a little bit, but maybe you gain interest on your money because you're not using it for the next 20 years. I'm not saying life in prison is great, but what I am saying is that there's a cultural difference, and the gender difference is even greater because you're labeled to being assaulted yourself because of the type of crime that you were found guilty of. And that is more likely to happen to probably a male than a female. I might be wrong, but I've been around doing criminal defense work for a while. What is more likely to happen for R. Kelly would probably be extorted economically and physically. I think I saw one clip where he was singing happy birthday to one of the inmates' children on one of these social media airings. And I know I'm not imagining that. Whereas I have a client that's actually in jail in the same facility with Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, and she's in there trying to create a revolution, talking about how the conditions are unfit and what they need to do to change. So culturally, it is so far apart as far as what will actually happen, and economically is so far apart what will happen when they're released. But to answer your question, is it on par? If I'm looking at these two cases without doing a long history and fact checking, it appears to be closer than not.
And I think also probably one of the issues here is in terms of the length of time too, I would imagine, is the counts, the amount of victims. So, you have that to factor in. Now, in terms of the wealth,
I'm sorry, Ed, when you say the victims, I don't want to make this whole show about that, but when I look at the cases on par, right, we know that there was a defense or the impression that those that were victimized by R. Kelly were groupies. And I guess that same type of label was brought around Jeffrey Epstein, not because he was famous by his singing ability or acting ability, just because he had money, but one appears to be a little bit more quote unquote violent than the other. And I think that plays a factor as far as the sentencing.
Yeah, I mean, the differences in the cases aren't stark. You're dealing with minor women who, didn't, have the ability to actually consent because of age. Mm-hmm. You have many of them, not just one or two. In one case, it was, my understanding is Ghislaine Maxwell would find these women, bring them in with the expectation of them getting money and getting their financial needs being taken care of. On the other hand, women who looked at R. Kelly's fame and were quote unquote fans, but at the same time were dealing with expectations of enjoying the wealth that R. Kelly had at the time that he had it. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to be completely diminished. I mean, because I would imagine that, he has the right to royalties as long as his songs are played. Now, I know that in many venues, DJs are refusing to play that music. So are radio stations. I'm not sure if that may change in the future once he's in prison and becomes subject to some level of obscurity in terms of people kind of forgetting about him. That has happened with other individuals that years go by and people.
I don't know if this one is going to disappear.
I mean, look, it all depends. It all depends on the generation. It all depends on how the generation filters this out. I mean, a lot of people said, and this person wasn't charged criminally, but we know that there was alleged conversations about when Elvis Presley was on the road, right? We know that Michael Jackson went to trial, right? That's not stopping people from.
Well, they were actually protesters outside of the Broadway show.
That's right. So they still play his records. They still play his records.
So Captain Brown had a question. She said she wonders if Maxwell will even serve her entire sentence, which is
I was listening to somebody last night kind of talking about that, and I had to point out that in federal court in the sentencing guidelines,
you serving that time.
You're serving that time.
You're serving that time. There's no behind door number one. When that judge looks at the sentencing guideline range and decide that you're going to do 20 years, you doing 20 years. The only issue is where and how comfortable or how uncomfortable you may be.
And as Royce pointed out earlier, these are both federal cases.
That's interesting. That people don't understand there is no wiggle room in federal court, but for those who suffered publicly the retelling of the story, you just hope that these sentences do bring some sort of peace, because you can't get back a violation once a violation happens. But when there's some sort of opportunity for that day in court to yield, seeing someone have some way to pay for what they've done, my prayer is always for the healing that needs to happen for all parties, because everyone involved is damaged after something happens as tragic as both of these situations. So it just makes you hopefully think about the actions that we take and the things that we do, how it affects other people, and how being complicit can also get you into a very bad situation. So when, just like New York City subways, you see something, say something. You have to do something when there's injustice, no matter where it shows up and how it shows up. So thank you for giving us some insight there. But this brings us right into the next topic of conversation that has been hot and heavy since the ruling came out. Seeing what we've talked about on this show, why it's important, when it comes to who you put in positions of power that can put people on the highest bench in the court of the land here for the United States of America. And we saw that Roe v. Wade was overturned by the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization is the case that was decided that overturned law that had been in place for, I believe, over 50 years. It's still, I think folks are still reeling off of this. I know that a lot of women from a previous generation are extremely upset because this was Roe v. Wade was a major victory for the women of that time. And to see it peeled back like this, they're very, very upset. And so it's going to be up to this generation now to swing the arc of justice back to the right place it's supposed to be. So this is going to be a very interesting fight here. I mean, what say you?
I mean, what's interesting, I hear you speaking from a legal perspective, and I'll add the cultural. What is interesting here is that what we're not talking about, and that's national media, and maybe they don't need to talk about it. Maybe we need to talk about it in the barbershops, in the hair salons, and nail places, is that Roe v. Wade is a woman's issue, and it affects white women as well as other women. But we know how white women are viewed historically in America. Sacred, untouchable. We died. People of color died just looking at white women, right? We can go on the history, Emmett Till, of touching or being accused of touching or looking or winking. We know the history here. And so if this Supreme Court, I'll bring it full circle, if this Supreme Court is willing to touch rights that are sacred to their sister, their mother, their aunt, because they think that this constitutional right should be done away with, we need to take a double look at what this really means. What does it mean for the voting rights for Black folks, which is a constitutional right? What does it mean when the Constitution says you're 3/5 of a person? What does that mean? So that what it says to me culturally is that no right, constitutional or otherwise, when it comes to people or regarding or concerning people of color, is sacred. Because here's an example where a whole gender was affected by a decision. And what it also shows is that Trump lives forever by placing people in power while president and outgoing president, which Obama, they made sure that Obama could not appoint a Supreme Court justice when he was outgoing. But the Democrats, once again, allowed to be bullied, allowed to be, suffocated. And so now we have this Supreme Court, which is more conservative than not. And you look at things like affirmative action. You look at Black secession plans. That's the thing that we really need to pinpoint by this decision, that policies like affirmative action out the window if this Supreme Court gets a hold to it. Cases of that nature. Black secession plan. What is the secession plan when we empower? Because Trump showed his playbook. Hey, I'm in power. I'm gonna leave a secession plan. You, and you right there, and you over there, and you over there are going to be put in position of power in order to do things. And on a small level, on a very, very small level, we can look at, I forgot the brother's first name, but his last name is Brother Blackwell, who prosecuted the officer in Minnesota, right? And they won that case, right? The George Floyd, right? He prosecuted Chauvin, right? Look at his career. His career is now off in another direction. Biden appoints him as a U.S. district judge, right? Putting people in place in power that reflect your policy allows you to not get reelected or allows you to move on, but your policy and your practices are still implemented and live forever. And that's what Trump taught us.
Well, I think it speaks to this this success by the right to be able to implement their agenda. They put judges on the bench. Now they've been able to swing the U.S. Supreme Court to the right. The question is whether or not women in this country, as a unified force, no matter a race or class, whether we are going to see them project their power in coming elections. Because what I think folks have to understand is that as long as you continue to vote for conservative politicians, you will then it will then reverberate or turn or result in other changes in the way your government looks and your courts look. Okay, you put Republican congressmen, Republican senators into place. They then use their power to make sure that conservative judges end up on the bench. And now you have this. Some years back, you had the right taking some losses in terms of, the federal seats in Congress and the U.S. Senate, in the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, even the White House. What do? They then start concentrating on state houses, on who becomes governor and so forth. And this Dobbs v. Jackson had to do with the law in Mississippi. You have several state legislatures over the last 10, 20 years passing laws, taking a swipe at Roe, taking off little pieces of Roe, and now they finally achieve success. I think what happens is that those who consider themselves progressive need to start thinking long-term, not short-term, long-term, playing chess, not checkers. Okay, this was a chess move on the highest order. Okay, I even feel like what's happening here is not even reflective of how the entire country thinks. Most polls that have been done show that the majority of the public and the majority of women in particular believe in a woman's right to an abortion. This idea that that this decision is one that reflects the mood of the country, I think is inaccurate. The problem is, though, that people who vote for these conservatives sometimes think that they can vote on one issue and not affect another. I really hope that there's a reversal of that. I hope that the results of the midterm elections speak to the unpopularity of this decision and this move.
Well, right? and let me say something. One is, when you get a chance, Dr. Grant, I want you to put up again what Raymond Chick said, because I think that's important. Two, what I want to say to what you're saying, Ed, pointing out, not disagreeing, but pointing out, is that anything that goes on now, you playing for a consolation prize, bro. Right? You not the championship is already happened. The Supreme Court is already where they're at and what they're doing. You're playing for second place. And what do I mean by second place? You're now looking to effectuate your immediate state and saying, look, I'm going to vote for Royce Russell because he's pro this, and he's going to change the legislation within my state to make sure that my rights as to doing this, abortion or whatever it may be, is upheld. Like New York did it, codified in its constitution. Like New Jersey, like Connecticut did, codified in its constitution. The question becomes, and the reason why Raymond's analysis, and we'll read it, is important. The question becomes is, and I'll make an analogy of the Black community, in the Black community or in community of colors where gun violence might be greater than not, urban communities. What rights are you willing to give up to ensure that the result of 11-year-old getting shot in the head by a stray bullet doesn't happen? Right? We talk about domestic terrorism. The NRA is saying, look, we're not willing to give up our rights. Second Amendment, 14. We're not willing to give that up to stop terrorism, domestic terrorism, these massive shootings. We're not willing to do that. And so when you circle back around to abortion, and you circle around that it's going to be state by state driven, how much of, and once again, Raymond speaks to it, conservative white women, 60% voted for Trump, are going to dig their heels in and say, you know what? We want somebody that's going to reverse that. And I'm saying the reverse of what you said. But are they willing to take on everything else that goes with me reversing it? Are you going to put me in office so I can reverse it? Are you going to take on everything else? You going to take on eating greens on Wednesday? No, you don't want greens and ham hock on Wednesday. So you know what, Royce? We're not going to put you in, even though we want you to reverse something.
So let me pause you for a minute. Because I heard, and I want clarity, because I'm sure if I heard it, it's on the streets in a number of places, that there is an opportunity for the Senate to reverse this, right? For them to go around the Supreme Court ruling on this, but they would have to vote within the Senate and the Congress to make that happen. Is that fact or fiction?
Yeah, I believe for years that people have been talking about codifying this right. Several state legislatures, as was pointed out, have codified the right.
That's
the
right.
question is it going to happen on a federal level? That's always been a question. And I don't believe the proponents of that have ever been able to muster up that level of support to make it happen. What has happened instead is that, you've had this Supreme Court case kind of protecting this right. And so it's been chipped at for several years and finally destroyed, if you will. I don't want to get into all the fine points, but certainly, it's in terms of it being deemed a constitutional right, that is now, changed. And the only way to deal with this in the short term is for women to travel to states where they can get it. All right. Or you and people are also thinking about the next fight, which is probably by the conservative, which is going to be to stop, say, drugs that or medications that achieve the abortion purpose from being sent into states where it's otherwise illegal,
Dr. Grant, to what you're saying is I don't know if it would ever happen. And the reason why I say that is that we as Americans, the Senate, Congress, can't get together to deal with issues where innocent children are being killed by people that are purchasing guns and using them in mass murders. See the argument that, pro-right and you're taking a baby, that person doesn't have their rights and things of that nature, that type of sympathetic, empathetic argument that's used to say we have to stop this. That same argument, it could be transposed to kids that are being killed while they sit in their kindergarten class. So let's take away the guns. That's not happening. It's just not happening. And I don't know if there's a movement out there that can make it happen now that this has been lost.
To your point, here we go with the Supreme Court striking down the New York concealed gun law in a 6-3 decision. So I hear you loud and clear. And as a human being, we should be uncomfortable hearing about innocent children losing their lives. And we just can't seem to want to do something different to prevent these kind of crimes. And to see that this was struck down, I was like, oh my goodness, we are in for a rude awakening of the pulse of this country right now.
Yeah, I mean, this decision was delivered by Justice Clarence Thomas. As stated in the headline, there was a 6-3. The three dissenting votes were Sotomayor, Breyer, and Kagan on this one. It's an interesting decision. It's New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. As I explained on a previous show, this case surround the applications of two individuals who applied for unrestricted gun licenses and were denied, meaning a license that would allow them to carry their weapons outside of their home. And so, the law was upheld on the district court level,
on every
Court
level.
of Appeals as well.
Every level.
Yeah, except the Supreme Court, which reversed and has now remanded back to the Court of Appeals for further proceedings. I would imagine detailing what parts of the existing law are now invalidated, if not the entire thing. I know that there are conversations taking place at the New York State legislative level, conversations with Mayor Adams, because this really had to do with New York City. And for years, New York City being considered what is referred to as a sensitive place where, it's very crowded urban area, and to allow the free and open carrying of pistols and revolvers to, not be something that that is legal. And so, what you had the court basically say that New York law violates the 14th Amendment by preventing law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms in public for self-defense. And because what's happening here basically is that in order for you to get a gun license, you have to demonstrate a special need for self-protection, distinguishable from that of the general community. So what you would see is, say, somebody who carries large amounts of cash would apply for a license and be granted it because they demonstrate a quote unquote special need. Someone who has been, documentedly threatened or is under threat for some reason, distinguishable from the general public, gets to conceal carry, if you will. But the court is saying that type of burden to have someone have to demonstrate that need is unconstitutional. And I want to let the audience know, and I want it to be a point of discussion here, is that there are people of color who are celebrating this decision. I believe the public defenders are also celebrating this decision because, as you know, most of the people who go to prison for illegally possessing a firearm are Black and brown. And even if you don't have a record, when you're charged with felony possession of a firearm, you're facing, in most courts, an automatic 3.5-year sentence. And also
3.5 to 7,
some people argue that the granting of these licenses also was discriminatory as well. So there's a lot of sides to this story here.
Well, I mean, one of the sides is that as a former prosecutor and a defense attorney, as police officers have the right to carry off duty, you would think those in the legal system, as correction officers have the right to carry, you would think those in the legal system would be able to carry, right? they show the special need, right? They're not a jeweler, or they're not necessarily a barber that carries a lot of cash, but there's a special need, right? So that should be automatic, but it never rolls out that way, right? I think this is the NRA agenda being pushed and being forwarded. Look, when you talk about a city where guns are really not necessary in reference to special needs, or in reference to mass population, subway, schools, it's just unwarranted. Where are we going with this, right? We haven't seen mass shootings in New York. We usually see them in rural areas. It hasn't happened here. I hope it never happens. But what message are we sending with this? What are we saying? We're talking about, it's a war on guns because there's shooting and violent crimes in the street of New York City and other urban places, but yet this law survives. I guess the thinking is that those that live in the urban places that are committing these crimes don't apply for guns, so we're not really affecting them. We need to do something different to affect them to make sure that doesn't happen. But a guy like you or me, Ed, or Dr. Grant, we should be able to go get one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in terms of, mass shootings, I will remind there were 9 people shot in Harlem. I believe it was about a week ago. One of them, a star college basketball player. So yes, maybe we're not having the mass shootings where people are going into schools or hospitals and shooting, but certainly, and listen, and it's distinguishable, right? Because the presumption is that the individual or individuals who did the firing in this case, which I believe is still being investigated, I don't think they've caught a perpetrator yet. I would assume it was an illegally possessed firearm to begin with, but and don't get me wrong, my comments aren't meant to say that I'm in support of this decision here, because I do feel that New York City is already densely populated, and there's already a proliferation of illegal firearms, and to add to that mix, people being able to legally carry on top of that. I mean, one of the discussions is, I believe that this decision, and we'll probably see it once the case gets remanded back to the Second Circuit, I don't believe it affects the state's, city's ability to have schools, government buildings, polling places, courthouses, and in particular, the subway, not considered a sensitive place where you can restrict this carrying of firearms. But in terms of the streets themselves and outside.
But that's where most of the shootings are occurring, right? They're not occurring in the courthouse. They're not occurring in schools. They're happening in the streets, right?
But it happened in the subway, right? We agree on that.
Yeah. It happens in the.
That was a mass shooting.
Yes, it does happen. It happens in the subway. You are 100% correct as to that. But what I would say to you, and I've always said, when it comes down to gun laws and it comes down to effectuating change in this area, if more people of color infiltrate the application process, where then we can show disparate treatment, because those that are getting denied and why they're getting denied compared to others that are applying, then the laws will change. That, I would tell you, is a theory that holds a lot of weight.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a prevailing theory that restrictions on gun ownership have their roots in a way in stopping people of color from carrying. I mean, you had a change in Oakland, in California, when the Panthers started exercising their right to carry and would basically confront law enforcement, and
openly carry too. They
would go to the state, courthouse, and they carry to show that, hey, listen, and trying to convince people in the community that no, this is your right. And of course, the California legislature then went about the task of stopping that from happening. But you know, it just illustrates the many facets to this.
Many
but at
and
the end
many
of the day,
layers.
what you can't deny is that, you know, and you know, I hope that this is something that starts becoming more the story is that, you know, you know, children are dying. Children are dying.
Exactly.
People are
Captain Brown
dying,
just
and it has to stop. And
has to.
you know, we have to really start thinking about the living. I mean, I listened to some of the George Carlin commentary from back in the day where he criticizes the pro-life folks and who it is that they're looking to protect and who they don't, right? You know, I mean, it's amazing. But
Yeah, I can tell you one thing by your reference right there. I don't know when your birthday's coming around, but you are generations old, bro. George Carlin, you are hitting it hard. You are
oh my goodness.
You wouldn't know. You hit that.
No, because it's timely. He talks about
well,
how
I understand, but
He's talking about the fact that you
look,
know who he is.
Maybe you
want
could
you
have
to be
slipped, maybe you
born,
could have slipped in David
but they
Chappelle
don't care
or
about
something.
you once you're born.
You know. I mean, we
But
trying to be relevant, and we trying to stay up with the youngins. Maybe you could have slipped in Chappelle. You know, we edit it later.
You brought it all the way
this
back.
audience is going to recognize a George
I mean, like,
Carlin.
now you're gonna have our audience
whose audience?
looking up
'Cause
on
I'm
TV
young.
land. That's what's gonna happen. People gonna look it up on TV land now. They like, oh, Ed said George Carlin. Who's George Carlin? Now people on their devices, they're not even watching our show anymore because you know brought somebody up that like I don't even know, like say Satchel Paige, something, bro. Like you went way back, homeboy.
Before we move on,
something you want to say? I mean, I don't know. Where we going with this?
All right, Mr. Russell, before we move on, I just want to circle back on a couple of the comments from Raymond, Captain Brown, and Richard, because we're going to get into another conversation. But, you know, it wasn't lost on me what you said, Raymond, you know, the 12-year plan and all of what we've seen with the moderates and such. So it's interesting to see what is happening as a result of that. And Captain Brown, we echo again. I've shared your comment a couple of times because we are in a situation where innocent babies are being lost. And what you said, Richard, I mean, mass shootings in our neighborhoods. We see what's happening over and over again. So, you know,
but Dr. Grant, to all those points, and I don't want to be a hypocrite here, you know, I am a carrying member. You understand what I'm saying? Like Royce Russell put his application in. You know what I mean? My application is fully in 2 different states, right? Because I'm not going to get caught out here when the revolution comes rolling down my block. It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? You have people out here. No. I say this with levity, but look at how we go about doing what we're doing, right? People of color out here protesting. They're taking a stand. They're doing whatever they can do. They don't know martial arts. They don't know how to do anything to protect themselves in a large part, right? They don't know how to de-escalate from a physical standpoint, judo, whatever, karate, somebody grab you, how to like, yo, look, this is not going to happen this way. We're going to make sure that we just tie you up. But we out there banging sticks and banging heads. And there's a lot to be said. Black Panther wise, freedom fighters, you name it. Black Lives Matter. You have to know how to defend yourself. You just can't be out here willy-nilly and just, I'm walking these streets and I'm yelling and I'm protesting and you don't know how to protect yourself. And if there's a right out there that you think you need to take advantage of, then you need to take advantage of. I'm not saying that you got to go purchase a gun, but be on a list that you've been approved to have one. And keep on, reinstating it, keep on reapplying and make sure that it never gets stale, it's not invalidated. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between purchasing and being on the list. You got to be on the list.
Well, that's a point to digest for everyone who was considering whether or not you're even going to apply to be able to have it. I get really uncomfortable with all of this carrying and open carry and getting it. You know, when you have access to certain things, I think the likelihood that it'll be used increases. I know I get really varying debates on that, but it just makes me uncomfortable. It always has, thinking about who is going to get their hands on a weapon and what mental state they're in when they choose to use it. So good point, though. You can choose to buy or not, but at least have the capacity, if you desire to do it, that you're on the list, because it is a process.
That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
That's
Appreciate you sharing that.
That's enough to create this stir that, wait a minute, look at how many applications we have here, people of color. Look how many people that we have to validate, or we have to go through these applications, which create another litigation. That's the point.
Good one. Somebody's picking up what you're putting down, but let's continue on with what the courts are doing. This is a court day where the legal meets the cultural, and we're understanding what's happening in our court system. Once again, I keep repeating, this goes back to what we talk a lot about on this show. When you put certain people in office, who is going to advocate for the needs of your community, the needs right in your own backyard, what affects you, what affects your livelihood, what affects the ability to live a safe life, to travel to and fro. That's why being engaged is really not an option. You have to stay engaged if you're going to advocate for what you need. Yesterday was the close of the primary election. How many people voted? How many people remembered to go out in the primary and be a part of what is necessary in moving the agenda forward for those who you want to put in office? How many knew that there were civil court judges on some ballots? How many people knew about, who gets elected to the Democratic committee and the representation? There's so much that just happens, and as a community, we're not always in the know. So that's just my little commercial on why you need to be engaged. But let's talk about this. The court strikes down New York City law granting voting rights to non-citizens.
Before we get into the subject matter of what is before us, we really need to look at the title, right? I'm always into the critical thinking of how things are described to us, right? Rights to non-citizen residents. It's somewhat vague. You know what I mean? Non-citizen residents. What are you really talking about, bro? What are you talking about? Legal permanent residents? Say that. Say legal permanent resident. A person that had to go through a series of events to get what they call a legal permanent resident card. That resonates more with a person that is reading this than non-citizen resident. The reason why I say that is that practicing, law and immigration, having worked for the Department of Justice regarding immigration, when you become a legal permanent resident, the government wants you to know your history inside and out. It's just not 100 questions that they just give you that's willy-nilly. They want you to know what Congress is about. They want you to know what the Senate is about. They want you to know the past presidents. They want you to know the mayor. They want you to know what the judiciary branch does, what the legislative branch does. They want to make sure that you're going to uphold the Constitution. And I am saying that you go through all of this, and now you become a legal permanent resident. And now what the courts are saying is that you don't have the privilege to vote. And we know that there are voluminous legal permanent residents that reside in the state of New York that can sway an election in the drop of a dime.
Exactly.
This is not privilege versus right. Like if you want this other right, you got to do this one other thing. You are doing this thing. This is what you're doing.
Yeah, well, if I think you're right. The title can be misleading because what it was that, and just for background for our audience, this was a law that was passed by the New York City Council last year. What's interesting is that Mayor de Blasio did not sign this into law, and neither did Mayor Eric Adams once he took office. This was a law that eventually was enacted after a period of time when it wasn't vetoed either, because what happens is if the city council passes a law, the mayor has to either sign or veto within a certain amount of days, and if he or she does not, then it automatically becomes law. And that's what happened here. And I would imagine that happened because either the mayor's office had concerns about this law being able to survive court challenge, which what happened here was that some legislators and members of the Republican Party, basically conservatives, challenged this law, asked for declaratory injunctive relief in the Supreme Court in Richmond County, otherwise known as Staten Island. And they were able to get Supreme Court Judge Ralph Porzio to agree with them that this law is unconstitutional, that it's inconsistent with the election law. And so, and also because of its inconsistency with the election law, it wasn't a law that could actually be passed by the New York City Council without what's called a home rule message or a referendum by the state legislature. So basically the state legislature would have to be involved in allowing for an exception to the election law. And so the law itself, the law was that if you were a resident of New York City for at least 30 days and you were a legal permanent resident, then you could vote in New York City elections, not New York State seats, New York City seats for mayor, for city council, and the like. And so this law has now been invalidated. And as Royce pointed out earlier, it's for the proponents of this, New York City is a city of immigrants, right? You have this large amount of people who work here in the city, live here in the city, pay taxes, and go through the hoops of becoming legal permanent residents. Why should they not get a right to determine their New York City governmental municipal representatives at the very least? Mm-hmm. And so, it's a sad day. I will say though, putting on, the lawyer hat, and, where the legal meets the cultural here, I was skeptical that this law would survive a court challenge. And why is that? And it's because basically
I think the word skeptical you're using very lightly. We knew there was no way this was going to happen.
One, I could never believe that the forces that be would allow people who are not United States citizens to vote, because as the plaintiffs in this case argued, this addition of these quote unquote non-citizen voters diluted their vote, and that's what they used in order to get what's called standing to be able to challenge this law. Because the defenders of this law, the defendants were trying to say, listen, these people don't even have standing to challenges, but the court said no, they have standings because they're going to suffer behind this because their vote is going to get diluted. Now that diluted, argument, I find that to be an argument that has bigoted roots, right? Because I believe that the people who are claiming dilution also feel that, other folks who are actual citizens dilute their votes. They're spending huge amounts of time trying to prevent people of color from voting. So I'm not surprised that they used that argument here. And I would imagine they're going to continue this into the appellate division and then the Court of Appeals if the defendants go ahead and appeal, which I have a feeling they will.
They will. So as we start to wrap up,
one of the things that I would add to this, though, and this is the other side, from a practitioner who support becoming a legal permanent resident, right, and guides you through that process. Far too many times I see that immigrants become legal permanent residents and they stop there. And you say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is that sometimes they then find themselves in a precarious situation, maybe criminal related, maybe domestic related, that can turn criminal or domestic related. that will raise a red flag for immigration to say, now that this happened to you, or you've been accused of this, whether it's fraud, theft of services, whether it is something that has to do with assault or domestic violence, whether it's gun possession, whether it's selling drugs, now that you've been accused of this, we are now going to take away your immigration status, your legal permanent resident status. And after this is over, whether you get probation, whether you get an alternative jail program, whether the charges are dismissed, there's a possibility that you can be removed from this country by way of an immigration judge in immigration proceedings. So some small percentage in my brain says that, hey, look, if this affects you in such a great way, then become a citizen. And by becoming a citizen, you then protect yourself from being deported. If you are in a car and one of your friends have a gun and they being the police or district attorney, decides to charge everybody with the gun possession, and because you're a legal permanent resident, even though you had nothing to do with it, now you're in court, and now immigration detainer is being placed on you because you're a legal permanent resident, and now you got to go to immigration court to fight that case too. Versus, I become a legal permanent resident after 3 years of being a legal permanent resident. After 5 years, depending upon how you became a legal permanent resident, you then become a citizen and be done with it.
Well,
you have that happening now. I would imagine less now because
well,
if I may, I just got a question, Royce. Actually,
yes.
There was a time when the permanent residency was there was you didn't have to renew it, correct? And then that changed after 9/11. Now you have to renew every 10 years, correct?
Right.
And so now. And the next question is that and what I mean by people are now encouraged more once they become legal permanent residents to become citizens, so they don't have to continue to renew.
You would think so, but that's not necessarily the case.
And let me ask you one more thing: do you have to wait after becoming a legal permanent resident to apply for citizenship?
It depends. The answer is yes. The duration depends on how you became a legal permanent resident. Short story made shorter. If you became a legal permanent resident by way of marriage, then you have to wait 3 years, 2 years after you become a legal permanent resident in order to apply for your citizenship. If you became a legal permanent resident by way of a family petition, your mother, father, sister, brother applying for you, you have to wait 5 years. Now, the deal is whether it's the 2 years or 5 years, you have to show that you have good moral standing for that 5-year period. And good moral standing can go all the way from a traffic ticket to you being charged of gang assault. So once you clear that period, you need to apply to become a citizen. I don't know what people are waiting for. I don't know why.
That's another show.
That's definitely another show.
That's another show to talk about that because that's where the legal meets the cultural, right? It's understanding that we shouldn't delay access to opportunity. And I want to close out the show with the primary.
For all y'all that didn't understand, that was a way of her saying, all right, it's 4:59. We got to get off the mic here. And then I just want you to understand the inside because we keep it real here, right? You know, and we peeps it all, right?
Oh, Lord have mercy. Are you gonna pray for me? Where's Richard? Richard always sends up a prayer for me, dealing with our legal experts, especially one. It's his pre-birthday, so we're going to let him roll today. But I want us to think about the fact that that is something that we can talk about further because you are an immigration attorney. That's why we have both of you here as legal experts in criminal and civil immigration, employment. You know, these experts are here for a reason. So you can't say you don't know and you don't know where to get access to information. But let's just wrap up with the fact that this primary in New York City is very interesting. There's some that is still being measured with the results. Some not shocking, but there's some upset. There's a little rumble right in my own backyard in District 32 in Queens. It's a little tight election there for Assemblywoman who has been in the seat for a couple of years. We also have some other upsets in other parts of the city, but I'm sharing this because if you didn't vote yesterday, you are not represented in what these numbers look like. And some can be that close that if 2 or 3 people in a neighborhood did not vote, you can see what the results are. And it's very important to be engaged. So if you haven't seen the results, if you are in New York City, because we have folks that view us from all over the country, just do a search on primary results. You'll see what's coming in. And as I'm scrolling through, you can see what the differential is between some of these close races. And Senor Pajada, I know you love election law.
Oh, he lives.
No. I just want to point out for the audience that there is a second primary on August 23rd. Okay, and that was because of that redistricting mess that occurred. So just keep that in mind.
And we don't normally have 2, which means the voter turnout is.
People are just getting used to having it in June now.
Yeah.
People are still getting used to that. You know, there are generations and generations. They're waiting for September to come around. They think that you're pulling some type of trick on them by saying you got to go in June. Yeah. So I mean, we're still at that point. It is not like yawning in the morning. It's still foreign. You know what I mean?
Oh boy, it's time to end the show because now he's starting to rhyme. Oh my goodness. So Jason, thank you for tuning in. Captain Brown, thank you for being here. Richard, Raymond, we appreciate you. Marcus, everyone is catching the replay, #replay. This is Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the culture. We thank you for showing up. We're here 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. We might take a little time off in the month of July to celebrate Mr. Russell's birthday all month long. And we'll be back with some new exciting news with how we share where the legal meets the culture and give you access to 2 legal experts that can guide you in achieving justice if you find yourself in one of these precarious scenarios. So thank you so much for being here. Final words, gentlemen, before we close out.
Yes,
I just want to say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Royce.
No, I just want to make sure that we pay respects to Marlon Briscoe. We didn't do, pay respects to our ancestors. Marlon Briscoe, may he rest in power. First African-American quarterback for the American Football League, played for the Denver Broncos, played for the Miami Dolphins, died at 76 years young, 76 years old. First African-American quarterback ever to play professional football. We haven't gone that far, but rest in power and everybody stay safe.
Yeah, I echo similar final sentiments. Everyone, please stay safe while you're enjoying your summer.
Awesome. Thank you both. And thank you everyone again. And we'll be back when time allows for us to be with you on 4 p.m. Eastern Standard on a Wednesday. Bye-bye, everyone. It's Dr. Stacy signing off.